Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. For a very long time, I was interested in Carl Theodor Dreyer's The Word. First and foremost, because this is considered to be one of the most important films ever made, but also I had seen some of Dreyer's films before. I had seen, for example, The Passion of Joan of Arc, and I always considered that to be one of my favorite films ever. I had also seen Vampire, and I really enjoyed that experience, so I knew that Dreyer was a filmmaker that I really wanted to explore more in depth. But in addition, The Word is a film that is included on Roger Ebert's list of great movies. And, as if that were not enough in itself, it's also on the Vatican's list of 45 great films. So as you can see, I had plenty of reasons here to watch this film. I finally got the chance to do that, and I'm so happy I did, because I think this is one of those films that are actually worthy of their reputation. So that's the one that we are going to be exploring today. But before we do that, let me say this. If you want the full experience of the film, I would say watch the movie first and then you can come back to this analysis, because I am going to be touching upon some issues that deal with the plot and I don't want to ruin the film experience for you. So let's look at the characters first, for a reason that I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes. What we have here with The Word is basically the story of a family. We have Morton, the father, and his three sons, and also a daughter-in-law. Okay, so those are the main characters. Of course, there are others. We have the doctor, the pastor, the grandchildren, Anna, Peter from the other family. But I wanted to focus on the family that is at the center of this film. The first son that we meet as we watch the movie is Johannes, and he displays erratic behavior throughout the film most of the time. And his problem is that he believes that he is Jesus Christ himself. So already we have something interesting right here in this film. The second son that I want to mention is Miko. He is the one who is married to Inga, and they are expecting a child. Okay, Inga is pregnant. And Miko, when it comes to his faith, right? So we have one son who believes that he is Jesus, Johannes, and then we have Miko, who has lost his faith by his own admission. And then finally we have Anders. He is very close to his father in terms of the faith that he shows, but at the moment that we meet him in the movie, he's not really worried that much about his faith, because what he wants is to marry a girl by the name of Anna. So he wishes that, he will be able to get this girl's hand in marriage. That is his conflict right there. So we have those three sons in very different situations. And basically the story that is presented to us in The Word is the story of this family, a few days in the lives of these characters. And it's just a wonderful interlacing of the narrative threads that are provided by the situations that these men and this woman find themselves in. I think in a way you could basically describe The Word as an interlacing of three main themes, each one of which has to do with one of the sons. You have madness, then you have fatherhood, and finally courtship. So we wonder what is going to happen to these characters. Is Anders going to be able to marry Anna? Is the child of Mika and Inga going to be a boy or a girl? Is something going to happen? Is there going to be a development when it comes to Johannes's mental health issues that we see very clearly in this film? So I would say that the plot of this film is in a way a vehicle to explore some crucial, universal, even you could say existential themes. And we are going to look at some of those right now. I think that one way that you can approach The Word by Carl Theodor Dreyer is through the angle of the three cardinal virtues, which are, of course, faith, hope, and love. That the film has to do with faith becomes clear from the very start, because Morton is praying basically for his son Johannes to be cured, so that that delusion that he has, or what they perceive as a delusion, will go away and he will regain his sanity. But of course, after such a long time, Morton is beginning to lose hope that that will ever happen. His daughter-in-law Inga, on the other hand, says, just keep praying, keep praying for that. Even if you have been praying for a very long time, she says, you don't know what prayer may have set in motion. So you have to continue to pray for that intention that you have, which is the sanity of his son Johannes. Johannes himself also constantly emphasizes the concept of faith. He tells people in the community that they are not displaying enough faith, that their faith is not very strong. And actually, it is the faith of a child that allows him to do at the end of the film what he does. So I think that makes it clear that that is a central theme of this film. Regarding hope, okay, so we talked about faith, let's talk about hope. You can see maybe a little bit of hope in Anders. He is definitely hoping that he will be able to marry Anna, and there are some conflicts there that he has to deal with. But what I noticed about him is that he becomes downcast very easily when his proposal is rejected. So you can see that this is not a very strong hope. We said before that the community did not have a very strong faith. So part of the point that the film is making is that without faith, without hope, without love, life becomes just very, very difficult. And I think that the key point, and this is where we come to talk about love specifically, because we have covered the other two before, the most cheerful character in this film, the character who has, I would say, the right view of things, the right perspective, is of course Inga. She, I think, embodies these notions of faith, hope, and love. She is the living example of all of those things that the other characters should learn from. She always sees the good side of everything. For example, when Mikael tells her, "I have lost my faith," she says, "But you have goodness in your heart, and that is what matters." You get the sense that for Inga, the most important thing is love, the way that it should be, right? And this is a message that you can also find in the first book of Corinthians, that famous love chapter, as it is called, where it says that love is the most important of these virtues, right? Because also from the Christian perspective, according to that worldview, in the afterlife, right, after this life is in the past, the only one that remains is love. There's no need for faith anymore. There's no need for hope anymore at that point. But love is the most important one. So that is definitely something that you can see reflected in this film. There's another recurring theme that I think is clear and almost, I would say, kind of in your face, and that is miracles. Okay, this is a film definitely about miracles. Morton has lost his faith in miracles. He is not very hopeful that a miracle is going to happen. And even the pastor says that miracles do not happen anymore. I was really surprised at that. But that is part of the point of the film, that this is a community that has lost its faith and has lost its touch with God. They know, for example, that Johannes, according to their perspective, is insane, quote unquote, but they also realize that he is the closest one to God, even in his supposed delusion. According to Inga, who once again I believe has the right view of things, miracles continue to happen. There are small miracles that happen all the time, and that is something that the other characters have lost sight of, I think. In one key scene, we see the pastor and the doctor having a conversation at the table. And of course, they talk about their professions, they talk about their belief in science, they talk about their faith, and they have to discuss miracles, because that is a very important theme right here. And when I heard this conversation between the two of them, I was reminded of a very important passage from Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory that I wanted to share with you, because I think it has to do with this topic right here. So this is from Graham Greene right here. It isn't a case of miracles not happening, it's just a case of people calling them something else. Can't you see the doctors round the dead man? He isn't breathing anymore, his pulse has stopped, his heart's not beating, he's dead. Then somebody gives him back his life, and they all, what's the expression? Reserve their opinion. They won't say it's a miracle, because that's a word they don't like. Then it happens again and again, perhaps because God's out on earth, and they say there aren't miracles. It is simply that we have enlarged our conception of what life is. Now we know you can be alive without pulse, breath, heartbeats. And they invent a new word to describe that state of life, and they say science has again disproved a miracle. So I think that is something that has always stayed with me. I read The Power and the Glory a very long time ago. We're talking more than 10 years ago. And I still remember that passage because I think that one way to look at things is to experience the miracles around us, even if we have scientific names for them. I'm probably on the other extreme as some of these characters. I see miracles everywhere. I have that way of looking at the world. So even if we can explain something, even if we give it a scientific name, it doesn't stop being a miracle. So that's just something that I wanted to share with you to keep in mind sort of when you watch this film, especially that dialogue between the doctor and the pastor. And as I said before, we are talking about some of the plot elements of the movie regarding the ending, okay? This film has the happiest happy ending that I have ever seen in a movie because it really ends with what you could call a triple miracle. So that takes care of that topic of miracles. The movie also emphasizes an idea of discord that I found right here. And let me tell you what I mean by that because it may not be self-evident. I think primarily you can see a sense of discord when you experience the clash between Morton and the other man of the family who is Peter. Okay, they basically have different ways of practicing Christianity. They are both Christians, but they are divided. So that's what I mean by discord. One thing that I like about the approach of the filmmakers here is that these two characters are never labeled in terms of a denomination of Christianity that they practice. And I think that is a good thing because otherwise it would have been simplistic. If you could say, okay, this guy belongs to this branch of Christianity and this other one belongs to a different one. Basically, in a nutshell, what we have is that Peter practices a more austere type of Christianity. And on the other hand, Morton, at least according to Peter, practices a more cheerful brand of Christianity. That's the way that they perceive each other, at least. So Dreyer is excellent at showing how these divisions are truly harmful and ultimately they are even against the spirit of true Christianity. But unfortunately, as you know, focusing on these differences seems to be a human thing because unfortunately we continue to do it until this day. And I think this movie can teach us that that is probably, not the best way to go about it. I think in some cases, in most cases, we should probably be focusing on the things that we have in common, not only between different brands of Christianity, but also transcending that and thinking about different ways of practicing faith, because there are certainly many, many connections. Of course, there are differences, and it's important to acknowledge them. We don't want to fall into the mistake of saying all religions are the same, because I don't believe that is true, and I don't think that's fair, actually, to the different systems of faith that we have. But I think focusing on the things that we have in common may be a very good thing, at least as a first step, right? So that's the issue of discord. And then last, but definitely not least, when it comes to this film, I think this film really shows us the power of words, okay, which is something that is very, very important to me. Before I watched this film, when all I knew about the movie was the title, right, the word, what I kept thinking of was a passage that may be familiar to many of you, and that is, Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. Okay, this is a passage from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, verse 8. It's the response of the Roman centurion to Jesus, right, in the Christian Bible. So it's a great example of faith. That is the concept in which it appears in the Gospel. But it also points out to me to how important the word is in the Judeo-Christian tradition. If you look at the Jewish Bible, at the very beginning, God basically creates the world, brings the world into existence through his word, right? Let there be light, let there be this, let there be that. So the word itself is what creates us and the world that we live in. And of course, in the Gospels, right, moving on to the Christian tradition, you have the idea also in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word. And according to Christians, Jesus Christ is the Word made flesh. So I think whether you believe this, whether you read it literally or metaphorically or both, the point is right there, right? The word is something very important to us. Language itself, language as a purely human phenomenon. Outside of that, right? Think how powerful words are, how pregnant with meaning they are. something that I always explore with my students is precisely the power of words. We are just coming back from spring break, and my next class actually is going to be about the power of words. And I think it's fascinating how words have at least two aspects to them. We have a denotation and the connotation, and how amazing it is that we can agree on the meaning, the denotation of those words. For example, I say a word like dog, and everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? That is the denotation. But then when it comes to the connotation, think how just full of meaning that word can be, and all the associations that we may have with it. Some people will think of a specific dog, maybe the dog that they have. Others will focus, okay, dog really inspires in me concepts like friendship, like loyalty, things like that. Other people may focus on fear if they have a fear of dogs. I was bitten by a dog when I was 14 years old, and I still have the mark. That doesn't mean that I hate dogs or anything like that, but that is one of the associations that I have when somebody says the word dog, and that may be one of the reasons why I'm a cat person. But you know what I'm saying, right? The power of words, how pregnant with meaning, once again, they are. And I think that is something that the title itself inspires in me, and I think it's one of the themes in the movie. So now what I wanted to do is I wanted to just kind of throw at you some elements of style that you can look at when you watch this film. I don't want to go in depth with each one of these, but I think it's better if I just tell you some things that you may find here so that you're kind of on the alert about that when you watch the film, and you can kind of focus on them a little bit. When it comes to camera work, I found very interesting the panning here. This has to do with the fact that the Word was, before it was a movie, it was a play. So this is an adaptation of a play, and that is the reason why I focused on the characters first, as I was telling you before. You can also see, continuing with the idea of camera work, a sense of symmetry, okay? So there are many symmetrical shots. You're going to see them, for example, in one shot you have Anders and then Anna on the other side of the screen. You have the doctor and the pastor. You can almost divide the shot in two. At the end of the film, when you can see Inga right there in the middle, that's another example of that, and probably the most famous example from this film. The film also makes very good use of silence. Okay, you're not going to find music all over the place right here. It's quite austere in that sense, but there's also the ticking of a clock in some key moments, so look out for that. It's something that I actually did not realize the first time that I watched this movie. I played it afterwards, and I was on the alert to that, and I noticed that there are some moments, when the clock is ticking. There's a part in which one of the characters stops the clock. Then they start the clock again, and the ticking begins. So it's very interesting to see that. It's something that you don't notice at first. Also the performances, okay? And I'm not calling it acting here. I'm calling it performances. This is not what you're going to find in Robert Bresson, okay? It's not that type of performance slash acting, or whatever you want to call it, or non-acting, but it's not your typical acting either. And the result is that we have some distance from the characters, just enough distance so that we can think instead of just purely feeling. Okay, I think this is a movie that achieves a very good balance when it comes to emotion and the rational aspect or the thinking aspect of approaching a film. And something similar happens also with the interior versus exterior shots. So you have mostly, for the most part, interior shots, but those are punctuated by exterior shots. And to give you another comparison, this is not exactly the kind of approach that you're going to find in a film by Yasujiro Ozu, but it's not the typical approach either. Okay, and there's a reason why I'm comparing Dreyer here to Bresson and Ozu, something that you probably anticipate already. But I just wanted to say that. This is a film that deals with argumentation also. Some people like to look at prose cinema versus poetry cinema. I don't think it's very helpful to divide them that way, but I want to say that this film has moments of poetry, definitely, but it's also leaning towards that side of prose because it's a philosophical film, and it's even a theological film, I would say. So just wanted to mention that also. And then finally, when it comes to the style itself, I am looking at this film in the context of this famous book by Paul Schrader, Transcendental Style in Film. This book focuses, as you probably know, on Ozu, Bresson, and finally Dreyer. And what Schrader says is that Dreyer is the director who is a little bit more distanced from what he calls transcendental style. Osu and Bresson are definitely transcendental style examples of that, but he says that Dreyer is a little bit more distanced than the other two filmmakers. What he says here, and he quotes actually Dreyer, and I thought this was really interesting, and I absolutely love this. Apparently, Dreyer wanted to achieve a different style for each film. You know, a style that was suited to the particular film that he was making at the time, that responded to that film, and that basically arose from the film itself. So I think that is amazing. You know, I think that would be wonderful to have also in literature, in authors who said, okay, I am going to write this novel, and this novel is going to have the style that the work of art itself dictates, quote unquote, to me, right? So I think that is an amazing approach. I wish we could see a little bit more of that. Because on the other hand, you may think of something like the auteur type of approach, right? The auteur approach, this is my film, this is my signature, so I am going to impose that signature on the film, versus letting the film express itself, which is more apparently closer to what Dreyer would do. So I was really, really happy to read about that from Paul Schrader. And I recommend this book, and especially, of course, the chapter on Dreyer. And you can find some really cool information on the word also in that chapter. So let's wrap this thing up, okay? The Word is basically a very, very important film to me because it was the last film that I was missing from the Vatican's list of great films. So I'm happy that I have completed that list. I'm a list person, in case you haven't realized already. From the list by Roger Ebert, I am still missing 8 films. So they're kind of difficult to find, or some of them I know where to find them, but I have to get the subscription, you know, and I'm waiting for the right moment to do that because I'm kind of a little bit busy at the moment. But that is the context of the lists that I was looking at. And sometimes what happens to me is that when I watch a film and I feel immediately like watching it again, that's how I know that I have seen a great film. The film is calling me to rewatch it immediately. And that is exactly what happened to me with The Word by Theodor Dreyer. This is a film about miracles that reminded me that cinema itself is a miracle. Okay, I think that you may take this film, you may dissect it, you may explain how it works and all of that, but who can really, really explain the powerful effect that it continues to have on so many people? I think that is the most important part of a film experience or of a reading experience that we may have. So to me, that is the bottom line. Just please watch this film. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, just let me know what you think about it, because I would be interested on other takes on this great, complex and simple film by Theodor Dreyer. So, do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. As always, I am listening and I am always happy to reply to your comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. Those were my 2 cents on Theodor Dreyer's The Word. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.